Grace doesn't leave us where it found us. Grace propels us forward, empowering us to make different choices for God's glory and for our good. Welcome to Living the Grace Life podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and you've made your way to the corner of real grace for your real life. Do you ever feel like grace is more Sunday morning concept than everyday lived experience? Me too. Too often, grace is a side dish we hear from the pulpit, but not the nourishment that restores connection and rebuilds relationships on Mondays. Here at Living the Grace Life podcast, we replace the overwhelm of doing more and living less with a slower pace that nurtures God's grace in our ordinary, everyday lives. Grace for you, grace for them. Are you ready? Let's grace this life. In today's episode, we ask a pretty broad question. What is grace? We'll dig deep into grace's power, not only to pardon and forgive us, but to anchor us in God's favor, empowered to a new purpose. But first, have you ever been lied to? I'm sure you have. I'm also pretty confident that you've probably lied to someone else. I know I have, when we're being honest, right? Now, that's quite the start to this episode. But if grace is real, then so is our need for it. We don't typically set out to say things that aren't true about ourselves or about somebody else, but somehow the lie seems safer, more comfortable, more protective even. That was the case one evening as one of our sons took cover under a lie. I knew he lied. The evidence was tucked under the folds of the trash can in his room, all the wrappers of the food and the candies he wasn't supposed to have up in his bedroom. Months earlier, I would have immediately confronted him, pointing out the sticky remains, confirming the lie, and then left him to sit with the consequences. But months before, my husband and I adopted a grace-based model of parenting designed to help our kids identify their wrongs and then take responsibility for them. When I asked if he'd had candy in his room, he said no. So I said nothing of the obvious lie. Instead, I quietly prayed, and then I made a comment about how hard he'd been working to rebuild trust with his dad and me, and how we know that the truth doesn't always come easily, but that we could see God at work in him. We prayed together, I tucked him in, and then I headed downstairs. About 15 minutes later, I heard his little voice, "Mom, could I talk to you, please?" I walked into his room. Our boy was feeling the weight of having lied, like the wrong kind of anchor that dug its way deep. Lying left him stuck. I lied about the candy in my room. I didn't want to get in trouble because I promised not to do it again, and I'm really sorry, Mom. I know, son. We'll work this out together. Now, I wish I could tell you I always display this kind of grace, but the truth is, grace can be hard to come by sometimes, right? I'm grateful for this moment when grace won out, but that's not always the case. Grace isn't about ignoring poor choices or pretending everything is just right. It's about acknowledging the broken pieces and extending love and forgiveness despite them, whether they're pardoned to someone else or to yourself. Grace is for those moments when you were certain you'd have the courage to speak up, but didn't. Grace paves a different path for times you walked away in silence, knowing you should have stayed to work it through. Grace is for those flashbacks of saying out loud or tweeting what you wished you hadn't. Maybe you've heard about Peter and his conversation with Jesus on the beach in John 21. Before they met that morning, Peter had declared his allegiance to Jesus just before he got arrested and was led away to be crucified. Like a kid who promises to do his homework after watching a movie, no matter what, you know how that turns out, Peter backed out too. Rather than stand up for Jesus, he cut loose his anchor and declared he didn't even know him. It reminds me of a time when I was in 7th grade and several of the popular kids were jeering at me for being a Jesus freak. I immediately retorted, "I am not," and then slunk away in shame. Back on the beach, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? We might be tempted to hear this repetition as finger pointing or a subtle way of shaming Peter for being less than he thought he was. Our own eyes cast down in shame to what we perceive as God's judgment, declaring, you've messed up too much. You're not dependable. You're easily swayed like an insufficient anchor in the storm. You can't be trusted. But friend, God's not like that. Not at all. Do you mind if I geek out with some Greek for just a moment? Don't be deceived. I'm no Greek scholar, but I loved learning this language during seminary because of its impact on how we understand grace and the fullness of its restoration and movement in our lives. Put on your Greeking out hat with me for a moment. I promise it'll be fun. So where the English language has one word to encapsulate the different types of love, the Greeks use 4, each with its own meaning and result. Storge is the love of belonging. This is like what we experience when our parents welcome us home. Phileo is brotherly love, the kind of love we share with someone who has our back and likes to spend time with us just because. We've all heard about eros, right? This is the passionate love, the kind that's wrapped up in all the pleasure and all the feels. Lastly, there's agape, the self-giving, sacrificial depth of love that puts another person above oneself. The first 3 loves, they're common to every human. We've all experienced these forms of love to some degree or another. Agape, however, is a love that only God can supply. And its conduit is God's grace. Its purpose is to anchor us in God's grace. In other words, to keep us living in God's grace in our ordinary, everyday, real lives. When Jesus asked, Peter, do you love me? He was using this word agape, at least the first time. Jesus was probing deeper and perhaps asking, Peter, do you love me enough to die for me, like you blurted out at our Last Supper together? Do you love me more than you love what other people think about you? Do you love me enough to stand up for me when people won't like me, when it will make your life more difficult? Are you tethered to my grace that is always sufficient? As I'm sure you've heard or know in this story, the rooster crowed his indictment of guilt, a bit like the trash sitting in my son's room. Peter knew he had failed. Jesus knew he had failed. And by the 3rd time Jesus asked the same question, Peter knew that Jesus knew. But rather than an indictment, each question, it's an invitation to reaffirm his commitment to Jesus and to receive grace he didn't know he needed. How often do we face moments we know we've failed? We've lost our patience, set unrealistic expectations, or left the people around us or ourselves feeling inadequate and small. Grace offers us and them what Jesus offered Peter, a divine do-over that's rooted not in our resolve or our ability, but in his. Instead of pretending we're better than we are or shaming us for worse than we are, Jesus shares the work he came to do with humans like us who don't earn the right. Grace empowers us to take on new and responsibilities. Listen to what Jesus said to Peter. I love this. Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. Jesus didn't just forgive and pardon Peter. He actually entrusted him with the care of his people, a monumental task requiring deep love and deep commitment. That comes from God himself. How does this empowering grace show up in our ordinary, everyday moments? Today, choose patience with yourself or someone else, even though fast gets the job done quicker. I know, I struggle with that too. But have patience with your kid who's still learning to tell the truth. Show forbearance with a family member or a friend whose issues require more of you than you're prepared to give in that moment. Patience when things take longer than you had time for. Take a deep breath and choose slow over speed. I promise you, when you choose slow over speed, grace has room to creep in and grow. Maybe go for a walk. Take inventory of the ways that God has shown up sacrificially for you this week. Thank Him and ask Him for more. And it's okay. I think God really likes it when we ask Him for what we can't provide for ourselves. So don't be stingy with yourself when you're asking God for the things you need. I think it brings Him delight to hear us ask for His help. Or maybe there's someone for whom you need to put aside the scorecard. Remember what Jesus told Peter on another occasion? To Peter's question, how often should I forgive? Jesus responded, 70 times 7. In other words, forgive as many times as it takes for you to stop keeping track. I know for me personally, I needed that reminder just this morning. When we allow ourselves the anchor of God's pardon for us, as well as His pardon toward those around us, then we have capacity to live into what the Apostle Paul speaks in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. Listen to this. If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. Isn't that great news? Doesn't that just make you relieved? It does me. Grace doesn't leave us where it found us. Grace propels us forward, empowering us to make different choices for God's glory and for our good. As we close today's episode, remember, Jesus doesn't expose our trash to shame us. He invites us to a new beginning, a life anchored in His unending real grace for your real life. Thanks for joining our conversation today at Living the Grace Life podcast. If this episode has encouraged you, be sure and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd be so kind, would you please leave your review so other listeners would be equipped to live the grace life too? As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com or on Instagram or Facebook. I'd love to connect with you there. Until next time, live the grace life generously, friend. Grace for you, grace for them.